Thank you so much for watching Landumc Goes There. Please subscribe and hit the like button and the bell notification button. Pretty Woman is a 1990 American romantic comedy film that was directed by Gary Marshall. The screenplay was done by J.F. Lawton. The movie stars Richard Gere and Julia Roberts in the lead roles. The storyline centers on a Hollywood prostitute named Vivian Ward and a wealthy businessman named Edward Lewis. Vivian is hired to be Edward's escort for several business and social functions, and their relationship develops during her week-long stay with him. The film's title of Pretty Woman is based on the 1964 song "Oh Pretty Woman" by Roy Orbison. The cast could have altogether been very different. It's hard to believe that as perfect as Richard Gere was for this part, he wasn't the first choice. The role was first offered to Al Pacino and Sylvester Stallone, and originally the producers had Meg Ryan pegged to play Vivian. We're glad that Richard Gere and Julia Roberts ended up being cast in these roles because they had an obvious chemistry, and this was noted on their very first meeting. But Gere wasn't planning on taking the role at all. He was on the phone, ready to turn down the part, when Julia Roberts slid him a Post-it note with the words, "Please say yes," written on it. He accepted the role right then and there. And when he's playing the piano in the movie, that's really him playing it. And he also composed that piece that he plays. As far as the bathtub scene where Vivian sings, a lot of detergent was used to make a lot of thick bubbles. That detergent was so strong that it rinsed the red dye out of Julia Roberts' hair. She had to have her hair re-dyed late that night to shoot scenes for the next day. In the dinner scene where Vivian flings the snail across the room, the waiter who catches it says, "It happens all the time." Director Gary Marshall is the one that threw the snail himself over many takes before the actor caught it convincingly. While shooting the scene where Vivian lies down on the floor of Edward's penthouse watching old I Love Lucy reruns, the director is off camera tickling Julia Roberts' feet. He had to do this so that she would laugh convincingly in a hysterical way. During the sex scene, Roberts got so nervous about doing it that a visible vein popped out on her forehead. The director got into bed with Julia and Richard Gere, trying to calm her down and to make the situation more light. But Marshall and Gere took turns massaging her forehead until this vein disappeared. It's also said that she broke out in hives and was given calamine lotion until they were able to finally shoot that scene. The writer, J.F. Lawton, based the screenplay on interviews that he had conducted with prostitutes who worked the boulevards close to where he lived, and he combined it with corporate rating, which was an actual thing at the time. He had originally titled the movie 3000, after the amount of money Vivian and Edward finally agreed upon for her week of service. But the studio later changed it to Pretty Woman so that Roy Orbison's soundtrack could be used in the film. At the time of filming, Gere and Roberts were 18 years apart in real life. Gere was 40 and Roberts was 22. Vivian states that she was originally from Georgia and she has a mild southern accent. Julia Roberts is originally from Smyrna, Georgia. The director was not entirely sure that her accent would be successfully hidden in the movie, and this line about Vivian's hometown was added to explain any slips in her tongue. The piano key sounds that were made during the lovemaking scene on the piano had to be dubbed in post-production because the actual keys that were randomly hit by Roberts and Gere just didn't sound right at all, and it was completely unusable in the actual movie. Christopher Reeve auditioned for the role of Edward Lewis. But at the time that he did this, Miss Roberts was not present because of other commitments that she had. Reeve had to play the scenes with a casting director who kept her nose buried in the pages and read about as well as somebody from a community theater. Halfway through the second scene, anger, frustration, and humiliation got the better of Reeve, and he ripped the pages in half, dropped them on the floor, and he stormed out of the room. If you'll look very closely, you'll notice that Vivian hardly ever sits on a chair. She sits on a table, a balcony rail, but not on a chair. The director did this intentionally to show that a prostitute was more comfortable sitting on the floor than on furniture. Principal photography commenced on July 24th, 1989, but it was immediately plagued by countless problems, including issues with space and time. This included Ferrari and Porsche, who had declined the product placement opportunity of the car that Edward drove because they didn't want to associate themselves with soliciting prostitutes. Lotus Cars UK saw the placement value with such a major film, and that gamble paid off, making their Esprit sales triple between 1990 and 1991. Primary shooting was completed on November 30th, 1989. For years it was reported that Molly Ringwald had turned down this role of Vivian, but she told everyone in a 2010 interview that that was just a myth. The script did come across her desk, and she even states that she can't imagine anybody else playing this role other than Julia Roberts. But everything that you see in a film is not always the way it really was. That's not Julia Roberts that you see on that famous poster. Her head was photoshopped onto a body double. That body double was Shelley Michelle. And that's also not Julia rolling over in her bed at the beginning. Shelley Michelle was a widely used body double in Hollywood at the time. But one problem they had with her after she was hired was that they needed to change the way that she walked. Michelle was very graceful due to her training in ballet, but Julia walked more like a cowgirl. So they had to train Michelle and teach her how to walk the same way. Go back and watch this classic from the early 90s. It's a really well done film. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.